Welcome back to Afternoon Live. There's a live look outside from the Oregon coast, our Inn at Spanish Head Resort Hotel camera in Lincoln City. Thanks for watching Afternoon Live. Okay, do you dread going home for the holidays? From adult sibling squabbles to grumpy grandparents, the family drama at this time of year tends to intensify. So here to help us navigate all those issues, we welcome back psychologist Dr. Leah Katz. Great to see you. Happy holidays.
Nice to see you. Happy holidays to you.
I'm glad we have you here to navigate all this craziness because it does get overwhelming this time of year.
It does, and there's a lot of different things that we're juggling too.
Yes, absolutely. So let's kind of set the scene of we're adults and we're going maybe back home to a parent's house or another loved one that we're going to be staying with them for the holidays and maybe kind of reverting to some childhood behavior.
Yeah.
Why do we do that and how do we stop ourselves from doing that?
Yeah, and that's such a good question.
Yeah.
And I think it's so relevant to so many people. So the first step is to stop judging ourselves for it. I think oftentimes we go into this very judging part of our brain, like, what the heck happens to me and why do I do that?
Yeah.
But if we just lean in and accept that, oh, okay, this kind of makes sense because when we go back to our childhood homes or the people that we grew up with, it makes sense that we might be triggered or activated in ways that we were as a kid and we didn't experience because we've been out of that environment for so long. Yeah.
And there's different kinds of guilt, right? That misplaced guilt, like when you're saying you're being too judgmental of yourself, but maybe there's some appropriate guilt where you can kind of check yourself and go, hey, maybe I could step up and behave a little bit better in this situation.
Exactly, yes. And I think guilt is such an interesting emotion because it tends to get a bad rep, but there are times when guilt is appropriate. It's appropriate if we've done something to hurt someone or we've acted out of our own integrity. And in that case, go ahead and apologize and repair and make it right, which is entirely an amazing thing to do. But then when it comes to childhood stuff and going back home, and we often find ourselves with this misplaced or inappropriate guilt where we feel guilty for maybe doing things in a more mature or healthy way, but it feels wrong. You know, oh, I can't believe I set that boundary. Ooh, that made me feel guilty. And that's where we call it misplaced guilt, where the guilt isn't entirely or at all appropriate for that circumstance. And then we can sort of work with that and remind ourselves that we can do things different.
Being way too hard on ourselves. I mean, I think a lot of us are guilty of that, to overuse the word. Let's talk about adult siblings. I think a lot of people maybe have disagreements or challenges with their adult siblings. How do we kind of navigate that this time of year if maybe there's an ongoing rift happening, but you know you're going to have to get together and please the grandparents and everybody else?
For sure. And so I think that is a good circumstance to sort of pause, and anyone who's watching who this resonates for, and think, is this something that I'm anticipating coming up for me? And if it is, to step outside of the narrative of, oh, well, it's just going to be that way. I'll just have to sort of white knuckle it, like, you know, get through it. And choose a different path and get ahead of it even. There's enough time to have those hard conversations with people, as uncomfortable as they might be, but it really might lead to a different outcome around the holidays. Yeah,
a moment of discomfort is usually going to be well worth the positive outcome and long-lasting outcome after that.
For sure. And I think that oftentimes when we haven't had those conversations with family members before, we tend to assume how they'll go, or maybe that's just because we're feeling so uncomfortable with it. But if we do it in a regulated and skillful way and at a good time, there's a good chance those conversations might lead to outcomes that we're really pleasantly surprised by.
Yeah, and what about kind of prepping yourself for certain triggers that you anticipate might come up in this time?
Yeah, and I think it's a similar sort of thing, like pause, think about the things that come up for you year to year and see if you can get ahead of it, you know? So let's say, as an example, if this comes up, I hear this clients talking about this a lot. If you feel like grandparents maybe treat some grandchildren differently than others, and it happens year after year, and it's so uncomfortable as a parent, pause, reflect, and get ahead of it by having a conversation, again, in a skillful way where you can try, hopefully, and find common ground with whoever you're talking to. So let's say it's grandparents around not treating grandchildren fairly. You know, the common ground would be, I really want us to have a beautiful holiday together. And then express how it is for you. That's always a good rule of thumb, like a good conversation cheat to keep it to your perspective, because you have less of a chance of engaging the other person's defenses.
And a lot of times at the end of the day, we all do want those shared outcomes, the positive end result, but getting there, we get the wires crossed, right?
Exactly. And I think if we name the shared outcome from the beginning, we set the conversation up for more of a success.
And how about having a support person, a safe space where you can just go kind of release and vent?
Totally. That's so important. around the holidays, and especially with what we started off talking about with going back and getting activated or a trigger or finding yourself regressing, having someone you can bounce things off of is incredibly helpful, because sometimes we really can lose our way, you know, like, is this me, or do I have something to feel guilty about because did I say that in a harsh tone?
Sure.
That can be really, really helpful.
Okay, what about the off-color or inappropriate comment from an aunt or a grandparent when you just cringe and you go, I can't believe you said that out loud. Maybe it was okay in 1973, but not in 2023. What's the best way to handle that situation?
Yes. So again, this is a good thing also to get ahead of. If you have a relative who you anticipate or who has made comments that offend people or just don't feel right in the past, to really get clear about what is your line, when do the comments cross a line, when am I going to say something. And I love the packaging it in this way. If you think about intention versus impact, that can be really helpful. So if you express to whomever it is, I know you probably don't mean it in this way, and I know you're such a good person. So separate the intention from the impact. And this is how it lands for me, or it makes me feel really uncomfortable. It really helps the other person hopefully get out of their own ego and just hear you.
Most of the time, people aren't saying things with the intention to hurt or offend.
No.
Most of the time.
Most of the time, I know. And it's trial and error. And then, you know, if you do these things and you practice these skills and it's just not heard and they get defensive, I always like to tell my clients this too, like that becomes information for you.
There you go.
About that person. So, okay, this is what this person is able to handle and where they're at and where my boundary needs to be.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Great to chat with you.
Good to chat with you
Happy
too.
Holiday
Thanks for having
season.
me. Same to you.
Of course. We'll have more information on our website at katu.com.